Hey everyone, I'm Mike Helms. Sorry, I've got things on two screens here, so I'll try and stay focused on the camera. Um, so as Dr. Tim said, I'm a co-director at the Center for Bioinspired Design at Georgia Tech. And thank you all for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you. Just my background a little bit. I got my PhD in computer science. It's actually cognitive science. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is and how that's applicable to sort of to design in a minute. I currently work for the School of Mechanical Engineering as a research scientist at Georgia Tech. And as I said, co-director of Center for Bioinspired Design. I also have a little side gig, it's a little thing called Pattern Fox Consulting, where we talk to industry and try and teach industry basically how to look into biology for potential solutions to their, urgent problems. And so what is bioinspired design, right? Bioinspired design is, everywhere out there, every biological organism is a solution to many different problems, right? Optimized for particular functions that it has to do every day. So here's an example, the lotus leaf. The lotus leaf sits in this dirty environment in a swamp usually, right? It gets covered with all kinds of junk, but the lotus leaf, right, has to get energy from the sun. So how does the lotus keep itself clean? It has this really amazing surface. It's called a super hydrophobic surface. And little, bits of dust and dirt accumulate on it. But when it rains, the rain comes down, that super hydrophobic surface, instead of spreading that water up, forces the water to form into a ball. And then that ball, right, the leaves are sloped just a little bit, and that ball shoots off. And as it shoots off, it takes all the dirt with it. And so the lotus is associated with purity, right? Because you go into this dirty swamp and all you see is this bright, beautiful white lotus flower, right, in these leaves. So not only is that kind of a cool idea, it has been responsible for over 400 patents in the US database, right? If you look up in the US database, the lotus effect, 400 patents derived from just that one idea alone that we extracted from nature. So that's what bioinspired design is. There's something called lotus sand paint. So there's a paint you can paint your building with, right? When it rains, the water beads up and washes off and cleans the building for you, right? So no use of solvents and detergents, things like that to clean the building. It saves on water consumption and use. So it's a more sustainable kind of paint. And there's, dozens and dozens of different applications of that. So as I said, I work for the Center for Bioinspired Design at Georgia Tech. We focus on three things, really. We look at, students and education and teaching our students how to do this. We've spent a lot of time figuring out what processes and methods are best for how do we go look into nature, especially from an engineering perspective or from a design perspective. We're not trained as biologists usually. So how do we think about our problems in a way that we can access this world of biology, understand that world of biology, and then transfer those solutions to us? So that's the education part. We do research. So we have over $100 million worth of funding since I think 2005 on various projects throughout campus. We've got over 40 different labs working on understanding the biology. And once we understand the biology, how to transfer that. And we have some really weird projects like Doctor Who. I don't have a picture of this one, but he recently won what they call an Ig Nobel Award for understanding how wombats poop in squares. I'm not kidding. They do. I don't know how they do it, but why would you understand? Like, what's the purpose of understanding that? Well, it turns out if you can plunk a square out of a round tube, right, there's all kinds of manufacturing processes that can take advantage of that. Anyway, we do all kinds of crazy stuff like that, but it always leads, there's always an idea for how we can apply that when we learn to study it. So here's something more practical that Dr. Who was working on, the robo strider. So he figured out how a water strider can not only float on the surface of water, but also use those back legs to propel itself forward. And it's a very particular motion that it has to use, so it's not sliding back and forth on the very slippery surface of the water. So he developed a water strider to figure out how we can skim along the surface of water without breaking surface tension. Professor Dan Goldman looked at, along with at the Zoo Atlanta, they looked at how sidewinders move over sand. And in particular, a sidewinder in the desert can move up a slope of sand without having that sand cascade down, right? If you've ever run up a dune, right, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And so you lose all of this energy. But the sidewinders have figured out a way of undulating up the side of that without sliding back down. So he figured out how to do that. And now he's got robots that can do that for us. And he's looking at applications like, if we go out to Mars, right, can we slide along the surface, the sandy surface of Mars without falling down? So that's some work that Dan Goldman does. Latimer Sukrook looked at spiders, and I know this little creepy picture of a spider, but these spiders, right, they sit in their webs, and a fly will hit their web. And when a fly hits their web, they need to know where that fly is. And I know they have 8 eyes and whatnot, but at night that fly goes ding. It needs to be able to pounce on that fly to prevent it from getting away. And so it spreads its legs out, and on the end of the legs, it has these little tiny sensors, these little slits. And it turns out those slits, when they vibrate, they open and close just a little bit. And that just a little bit is something that it's able to detect. So it's got the legs spread out. And just like when we hear a sound, right? When you hear a sound, you know where it's coming from, because there's a difference between your right and your left ear and when the sound hits your right and left. And so you can identify where that sound is in space. Spider does the same thing with its legs. It can detect the vibration, and it knows it's got this circle of legs, and it knows exactly where that's coming from. Boom, it can move and catch that fly. And so Latimer Sukrook has taken that, and right now we can detect vibrations, for example, from your throat when you're talking. And folks who aren't able to speak, right, we can just vibrate our throats and translate that into sound and into language. Right? Pretty interesting stuff. So that's some of the research we do on campus. We also teach a class, as I was mentioning. Our class is, right now we do a 1 semester class. It's usually 25 to 40 students. We're expanding that significantly. It's part of why they hired me over in mechanical engineering, is to amp that up and get all of our mechanical engineering students involved in this bio-inspired design stuff. But it's not just about engineering, right? Bio-inspired design involves people from a variety of disciplines. So, biologists, mechanical engineers, we have biomedical engineers who are looking at medical applications for these things. Material science is huge, right? Biology creates, think about this, biology creates all of its materials at room temperature using, right, commonly available, locally available resources. And those materials have amazing properties. So if we can understand how that's done, right, we can alter and change the way we do manufacturing. We do what we call heat, beat, and treat right now, right? We pour tons of energy into all of those materials around us. What if we could grow our materials organically like nature does? How would that change the way we think about manufacturing, about creating materials, about concrete, steel, about how we build things? So there's a lot of potential application there. Over on the right is an example. We were looking at, in this case, it was our class is always focused on a problem domain. Nat, you'll be interested to know we did urban farming one year. And so had I known that before, I would have shown all of our urban farming examples. We can coordinate later and talk about that. But this was an example for thermal management of homes, right? So we were trying to make more sustainable built environments. And in this case, it turns out that solar thermal heating, oftentimes the fluids in them get overheated, they kind of overbake. And so this little guy, this beetle, golden beetle, he has this interesting solution when he needs to change color, or she, I'm not sure if that's a boy or a girl there, but when they need to change color, they flood that translucent shell with blood, and it changes to a red beetle, right? And scares off, and now people think, the predators think it's toxic and they run away, or it uses camouflage, whatnot. So this team looked at how that's done, and it used a temperature sensor to create basically a layer over that thermal solar heater, that when the fluid expands, right, that fluid expands and fills up and reduces the amount of solar radiation incoming and allows the liquid to cool back down. So that's just one example of we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of these over the years that we've created. So that's what, we're teaching roughly 40 students a year how to do this, and they move out into industry. So we're trying to sort of, from the ground up, build this pipeline into industry for, bio-inspired design thinking. At this, and we have our academics who are funded from the government doing this, and then we're looking back into the pipeline and saying, can we develop programs in high school, right? For high school, it turns out engineering is a really good place to do this because the standards allow us to have a little more flexibility in what we're teaching. And so we teach this, or we've developed this course. It's called Birdie, Bioinspired Design for Engineering Education. It's 8 to 12 week unit that's taught in 3 consecutive years that sort of build on each other. And we're teaching our students, right, how to build bio-inspired. They do a lot of hands-on design and prototyping in the courses. This picture is actually of our teachers. So we bring in the teachers every year. We have a summer camp for them. We take them out to the zoo and the botanic gardens. And I think it's really interesting when we go to the zoo, when we go to botanic gardens, we talk a lot about conservancy, right? We talk a lot about how to save endangered species and how species sit in their ecosystems. And I always feel a little bit bad every time I walk out. I'm like, oh no, there's all this, species endangered. What can I do to help? Well, bio-inspired design takes a slightly different approach as you're walking through the zoo, right? You're looking at these species and you're saying, oh my gosh, that's a fascinating innovation, right? That we were looking at the horn of a black rhino and how dense and strong that is. Or we're looking at the elephant's trunk. An elephant can lift a remarkable amount of weight with a trunk that has no bones in it, right? Nothing else, not even like an octopus tentacle can't do that, right? So there's something unique about this invention, how its muscles are structured. We don't even know how it works, right? So we're trying to figure that out. So every time I walk through the zoo or I walk through the gardens, I see all these potential innovations, all these potential inventions, right? And in fact, after you take these courses, every time you walk out your front door, that's what you see, right? You see a pine tree. It's pine cones, pine needles. The actual bark of the pine tree expands when it gets exposed to fire and creates basically a foam around it, right? It's amazing. Everywhere, everything you look at is an amazing potential for innovation. So it really changes your relationship with the world, this idea of bio-inspired design. I do want to just back up a second and talk a little bit about my personal journey and how I got here, because it's different, I think, than the traditional journey. Right? I started off as an undergrad at the University of Illinois, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I spent 5 years wandering around, and I think I had as many majors, 5 different majors in those 5 years. And eventually they're like, you're not really heading in a direction. Why don't you go take some time off? And I did. And I worked for an insurance company for a little bit. Ooh, insurance is really boring. Sorry to all the actuaries out there. I wanted to be an actuary. It's basically a math person for insurance. And while I was there, I created a personal vision, right? I spent some time introspecting and thinking about, what do I really care about? And the question I asked myself was, who are the people that I want to talk to every day? When I go into work, what are the kinds of people I want to talk to every day? That was the question for me that set me on the path. And for me, it was artificial intelligence. I want to talk about how our brains work, how we think. And so I created a personal vision and plan, and I sort of mapped it out. And I said, all right, what I want is a PhD in artificial intelligence to get the cool jobs. So I returned to the University of Illinois. I finished out my bachelor's degree. I worked part-time at a place called Teradata, which is like big data. I did some consulting there while I finished up a master's degree. And then I arrived at Georgia Tech. So I arrived at Georgia Tech in 2006. My peers were graduating with their undergrad degrees in 94. So it was 12 years later that I decided to get my PhD. And I guess my point is, one, it's okay if you don't know what you want to do right now. Things will work out. But find your passion, right? And pursue that passion. And that'll give you the drive to get through something like a long PhD at Georgia Tech. And now I get to work instead of an insurance company or doing marketing or all the other stuff I was doing, which was fun. Consulting is great. I get to work with biologists and scientists, and I get to work with all these wonderful people on sustainability every day. And every day I get to have these conversations about how can biology change the way we think about the world, right? How can we manufacture better? How can we design better? From my perspective, I would say, spend some time thinking about what it is you care about and the kinds of conversations you want to have every day, and then build a plan and a roadmap to get there, and realize that you are going to change, and that's okay. And just be prepared to change your plan as you grow and evolve and change. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those later. Thanks.